Is there. He takes it, and the Orioles are the new world champions.
Welcome back to Baltimore's Memorial Stadium. For 38 years in Baltimore, the baseball faithful have come to worship on 33rd Street at a venerable brick and concrete cathedral called Memorial Stadium, a place where the sights, sounds, and smells are just as memorable as the runs, hits, and errors. Baseball, the way it was played on 33rd Street, was a heavenly blend of class, grace, power, fun, and soul.
The St. Louis American League franchise was particularly shaky, and thank goodness there were men in Baltimore at that time who had the foresight and the daring to go out and get that franchise, and they did. The two principal figures, of course, were the mayor, Tommy D'Alessandro Jr., and Clarence Miles, who was a corporation lawyer.
To see Baltimore able to free itself from the shackles of the minor leagues. 51 years Baltimore was confined to the minor leagues. And for the day of redemption to arrive and for the Orioles to again be back in their rightful location, the American League, was a moment that I treasure and savor.
The emotional intensity was terrific. You've never seen Baltimore on such a high, not in this century.
Well, it was a Mardi Gras, it was New Year's Eve, and it was the 4th of July, all wrapped into one. I never remember in my lifetime in Baltimore a more joyous occasion.
It's a great thrill in 1954. The Orioles played a couple of games in Detroit. They split two, their first two games in their modern history, and then they got on the train and came to Baltimore. And we had a big parade, They got off the train in their uniforms, got in automobiles, and went through downtown streets of Baltimore and paraded to the stadium. And I can remember coming in Memorial Stadium, and the workmen were still working on the stadium. And it was a threatening day. It looked like it might rain out the home opener. We had a jam-packed crowd, and the Orioles won that game, if I remember. I think it was 3-1 over the Chicago White Sox. Clint Courtney and I think Vern Stevens hit home runs. And it was a gala day for Baltimore and the beginning of the modern era of the Orioles.
For one day, Memorial Stadium was Olympus when the Titans of baseball performed during the 1958 All-Star Game.
In 1958, the thing went over very well, and the stadium was full, and everybody had a good time. Beyond that, the game itself, you remember, was all singles. They didn't have anybody clearing the bases with a Homeric blast. And so it came and went. It was only a little while afterward that we realized maybe we should have made more fuss over it.
The most valuable player that day was the Orioles' very own pitcher, Billy Odell.
Well, I had pitched pretty good at Baltimore. You know, runs were sort of hard to come by at Baltimore, and of course I'd always pitched good against the Yankees, and of course Casey Stengel was the manager, and he picked the pitchers, you know, and that may have had a little something to do with it too. Early Wynn was going to pitch the middle innings, and we were just going to go from there, and of course he had a 4-3 lead, and had to have a pitcher to pitch the 7th, 8th, and 9th, and the telephone rang in the bullpen, and I sure it was going to be Billy Pierce. Ray Narleski was there, a great reliever for Cleveland for so many years. I think Paul Fortak was on that ball club, and I made sure it was one of those. But when the call came, it was for me, and of course, it was real exciting to be there before the hometown ball club and hometown fans and everything. And I was able to retire all 9 men I faced. I don't think anybody would ever forget Stan Musial the first time you face him, and I remember him and Mays, Bill Mazeroski, and Ernie Banks. People at Baltimore were always good to me. I came here as a bonus player and had no minor league experience, and they were real patient with me, and it seemed like whether I did a good job or not, they were always real encouraging to me, and I always consider Baltimore as my baseball hometown.
My first year here was an amazing year, and there was a lot of reasons for that. You know, Jerry Hoffberger bought the ball club that winter. He was a rookie owner, and Harry Dalton was a rookie general manager, and there was a lot of people and a lot of writers writing that we didn't really have a chance because myself was a rookie behind the plate. Davey Johnson won the second base job coming out of spring training. Paul Blair was in center field.
We won the World Series. The thing that really comes to my mind is the '66 World Series. I hit the home run in the 3rd game and we won, and in the 4th game I made the final catch or the final out for the '66 World Series.
It's my happiest moment. I have to think of the '66 World Series, which is the first time the Orioles got in the World Series, and we won, so I always say that's my happiest moment.
My first year I was spoiled, you know, '66, we beat the Dodgers 4 straight, and I got the last hit off Sandy Koufax, and that's why he retired, so that's a pretty good year.
That was not supposed to happen. No way that could have happened. And it happened, you know, in such a dramatic fashion that Frank Robinson hits a home run, and that loosened the ball club up very much in the first game. Brooks follows with a home run. Drabowski strikes out 12. They win the first game and then don't give up a single run in the next 3 games. Boy, that was the year for me. That was, I just couldn't comprehend, number one, that they had beaten the Dodgers. That they had beaten them 4 straight was unthinkable. But to shut them out without a run for 3 games, that'll never happen in another World Series.
The way that we turned this town upside down, man, I mean, it was probably one of the greatest parties and the greatest celebrations that ever happened anywhere.
Peanuts, dollar bag!
One of the things about that team, that makes it more difficult today is the fact that those fellas grew up together. They played together in Elmira, and they went right up on through the chain, and then finally came up here out of Rochester, and they knew each other. When they walked into the clubhouse, they'd been playing together for 5 or 6 years when they got to the major league level. Weaver, I think it's safe to say, used the 25-man roster as well as any manager I've ever seen. He made sure guys got at-bats. He was the first fellow that really paid attention to statistics. Now, he didn't want anybody to see this, but I had a pretty good hunch of what he was doing. But I'd ask him about it, and he'd never let me look at anything. Well, today, the kind of statistics that Earl Weaver used are published nightly in the press box. But he was that far ahead. And you know, a guy'd be on a pretty good hitting streak, and a pitcher would come out one night, you know, Smith, and you'd say, well, why isn't he playing tonight? And you'd find out that Weaver looked back and saw that he was like 1 for 25 against that guy, and that's why he didn't play.
No, Weaver tried to convince me and try to pull the ball. And when I came up from Rochester, I was more of a straightaway line drive hitter. And I went into his office a couple times, and he says, you know, in 10 years, you're going to be the MVP in this league. And I just kind of looked at him, just kind of laughed, because I was not known as a guy to hit the ball out of the ballpark, and which I did at Rochester. I hit 22 home runs there, but that wasn't the major leagues. But he was right on. He was 10 years to the date right on. So I don't know if that makes him a prophet or not. I don't know.
Earl just wanted to get everything he could out of everybody, and that included the umpires. Jim Palmer tells the story one night. I can't remember the name of the umpire, but Jim was a little unhappy. He wasn't getting some pitches for strikes he thought he should have gotten. So Earl decided he'd go out and take care of it. And Jim tells me he got out there to the mound and stayed there until the plate umpire walked out. And when he got out there, Earl turned with his hands on his hips, as he always does. He said, look, he said, we got a guy here that's won 20 games a year for 8 years. He's won 3 Cy Young Awards. Now you tell me, where do you want him to throw it for a strike? You're out of here.
That was such a bitter experience, but I can tell you one great thing that happened. And that is when we lost our 3 in a row at Shea Stadium and flew back to Baltimore. When the team got back to Friendship Airport, which is what it was called then, there were, I don't know how many people, 500, 1,000, waiting for us, and just about everybody in the club cried. I was sitting next to Charlie Lau on the plane, and as they opened the doors to let us out at Friendship, we heard a noise. It was like a whoosh, sounded like a brook. And I looked at Charlie, he looked at me, and he said, I don't believe this, because by this time we figured out it was people, and they were cheering. And we hadn't done anything to cheer about in about a week. So Harry Dalton, the general manager at that time, said, I think that's when we won the 1970 World Championship, because it gave everybody so much resolve. We were underdogs in that series. Everybody thought this big red machine was just going to rub us out, but thanks to Brooksy and others, it was perhaps the greatest experience in the club's history. Better even than beating the Dodgers in four straight. I'm not quite sure why I say that, except that we really played better, and the Reds played better than the Dodgers had. So I think we accomplished more. But you know, Brooks wasn't the leading hitter in that club. He was a dominant player, but Ellie Hendricks played a big role. Paulie Blair played a big role, and so did Booger. And the pitchers. We used Dick Hall, I recall, saved a key game in Cincinnati. So it was just a wonderful experience.
None of us were too familiar with artificial surfaces at that time. But Brooks just showed everybody it didn't make any difference whether he was playing on glass or in tar. It couldn't make any difference at all. He just had an incredible World Series. It's great to see that kind of a series happen to somebody who has contributed so much to the game of baseball. I think fans everywhere rejoiced in the fact that Brooks just made one incredible play on top of the other and hit very well, and it was a kind of a thing that I'm sure every professional athlete, maybe in his dreams, would hope that, boy, would I love to have one series like that and then have it turn out to be in the World Series where everybody sees you, and Brooks had it.
The ball clubs we put on the field here at Memorial Stadium in '69, '70, and '71 probably were some of the best teams in the history will never be judged as that because of our lack of success in the World Series.
The first time they played the Pirates in the World Series, one I'll never forget, was out of everything that happened in that World Series was Clemente's throw from right field to the plate, which still burns a hole in my memory as being one of the great throws I've seen in baseball.
Remember a World Series here that I covered in network television also, when Cuellar was pitching to Roberto Clemente. It looked like the Orioles were going to win that series, and Clemente had a little chopper back to the mound, and Cuellar caught it and turned, and Clemente, with that hustle and desire and drive and speed, beat it out, just barely. May have turned the World Series around, and later on in the World Series, Clemente hit a bullet in the right field seats here. So that beat a pretty good Orioles team.
Back then we were young and we were hungry to learn how to win, you know, and we were really lucky to be with an organization that stressed a lot of fundamentals and to play for a manager as good as Earl Weaver. I mean, he kicked our butts every single day and we hated him for it, and now that we've all lived through it and seen you know, what has happened to all of our careers on account of it, you look back and you say, you know, something that he was the best I ever played for. And
of course, the first World Series game of '79, we got snowed out. And my first reaction was that I overslept and it was now December. And but to go through all the meetings with the press before and then have to turn around and do it again the next day after the snow out. I remember my dad being here and him saying, "You're more worried about the press than you are the Pirates." I guess that's a good thing. But you know, just to be honored enough to start the first game of that series was something I'll never forget. And I don't think once you go through something like that, no other game ever has had the importance of what that game had to me personally.
Probably the biggest thing, 1979 World Series, played with the Pittsburgh Pirates, and we came here, and especially the seventh game of the World Series, we're down 3-1, and then to come back and to possibly play the seventh game here in Baltimore against Scott McGregor as a pitcher. And I remember in my first at bat, the fans in Baltimore let out a yell that vividly to this day, I can still remember that yell, and it was as loud as anything I've ever heard, and it was almost frightening. I had to completely step out of the batter's box, maintain my composure, get back in, and then proceeded to pop one up to the catcher.
Stargell hit a home run off me late, and then I guess as fate would have it, in the ninth they had a runner on third, 2 outs, and Stargell again hitting. And I can remember saying to myself, you're going to throw this ball as hard as you can and hope, because he's a pretty darn good hitter, and I threw it hard as I could, and it was away, thank God, and he hit a fly ball to Belangelo. I can still see him taking those little steps and catching it.
My number one memory was '83. Second game of the playoffs. They had lost to Lamar Hoyt in the first game. And, you know, the White Sox then had the 3 games at home in a 5-game series. And the Orioles didn't come out for the national anthem and ABC, and people in the press box were saying they're nervous, they're rattled for the first time all year, this is a terrible thing, what's going to happen? Well, of course they came out. Boddicker pitched the great game, turned the series around, they swept right on through. And the great thing was that Mike Flanagan later told me that the reason they weren't out was that they had to wait for the decision on People's Court, and ABC television be damned. That team, that was the personality of that team. I mean, they were iconoclastic, irreverent, and they had a lot of fun, and they were really one of the last truly fun teams around, and I don't think the game will ever quite be the same.
Well, it was a mature team. It was really the '79 team, adding a couple of players, and I pretty much could have told you the first game of spring training that team was going to win. In '82, we had lost in the last game of the season coming from way back, and that team got to spring training, and you could feel it. That team was on a course for the series. We'd learned a lesson from '79 and the frustration of '82, and that team just really went wire to wire.
You know, it would seem that a baseball team is only as good as the pitching is going to take it. I believe it was Connie Mack, the venerable one, who said that baseball was depended upon, in any evaluation or breakdown, 75% of the importance of winning a game depended upon the pitching.
Well,
I think if you were to evaluate the Oriole teams that have been winners in the years that they've been here, you'd have to start with pitching.
Well, I remember playing against one of the most brilliant managers probably in the history of the game, a fellow named Paul Richards, who somehow always had those great young arms, whether it's Steve Barber or Milt Pappas or Chuck Estrada or Jerry Walker or Fat Jack Fisher and on, and then they would close with that knuckleballer Hoyt Wilhelm. Richards was a brilliant man.
Richards' pitching coach, Harry Brackeen, offered young southpaw Dave McNally some helpful tips.
David, let's get now out there on the, let's come set out on the end on your follow through now.
On the regular windup?
Yeah, on your regular windup, yes, And another thing, David, hiding the ball a little better. You're not getting the ball quite deep enough in your glove. Be sure and get it up in there real well. Now, let's try another one of those. That's very good.
And you go back over Oriole ball clubs, and you will find that for the most part, the winning Oriole clubs would have 4 or 5 pretty good starters going out there every 4th or 5th day. And Jim Palmer, down through the years, was, you know, he just pitched so well so many times, and he had good people to play with, don't misunderstand me.
Well, it was a pitcher's ballpark back in the, the 60s and 70s, mainly because of the pitching staffs we had. It was a ballpark where if you let him hit it down the lines, it wasn't too hard to hit home runs, but if you had a pitching coach like George Bamberger, whose theory was if you could establish the outside corner of the plate, you had a chance to be very successful.
I always remember the white houses at the start of the year in the outfield when you had to play a day game against a right-handed pitcher, and that's why Palmer won so many games. One of the reasons he won, not the reason, one of the reasons he made one on those day games was you just couldn't see the ball come out of there.
What's the quota for hunting Blue Jays? Well, on August 23rd, 1983, relief pitcher Tippy Martinez bagged the limit in 1 inning.
I think everybody knows Lynn Cicciotti was my catcher, and had John Lowenstein playing second and Gary Renicky playing third base. So it was kind of not a real familiar infield, or even, as far as catching wise.
Those were the first time. That's the first time. Those were the first runners that I saw Tippy picked off. So it was funny. The first time I laughed, and the second time it was even funnier. And I remember someone in the bullpen saying, "Can he do it 3 times?" I'm trying to think if it was started who said, "Well, they're going to try to run in Sakata. So if you throw over there again, there's a good chance you might get him the 3rd time." And sure enough, he went over there the 3rd time. The guy was leaning the wrong way, and he picked him off.
It was just one little freaky thing that happened because everybody was trying to run on Lenny, and I didn't want to throw the ball to Lenny because I wasn't sure if he was going to catch it. He was so far back, I couldn't see him. And he wanted me to throw him the ball so he can throw some people out. And I didn't want a loss, so it was kind of one of those things that somebody got on base and I was going to throw to first base all night long if it took all night, and just caught him at the right time.
Although their careers may not have earned them a trip to Cooperstown, many gifted Orioles are permanently enshrined in our hearts and imagination. A glimpse at a covey of birds reminds us of how high they once flew.
Down through the years, if you look at one position in baseball where the Orioles have really not developed an outstanding player, it would be at catcher. Triandis was great until the Orioles got a hold of Hoyt Wilhelm, and that, Gus really hated. He just hated to try and catch Wilhelm. But yet when Wilhelm pitched his no-hitter, he hit the home run to win it for him. But it was, and Paul Richards designed great big gloves and all that other kind of stuff to try and help. But it didn't make any difference what you did. At the minute that Wilhelm was pitching, Triandis was unhappy. He might have 2 for 4, 3 for 4, but he was still not happy about trying to catch Wilhelm. But he was one of the best Oriole catchers we have ever had, if not the best.
Gentile was a flamboyant fielder, swung the bat with tremendous authority. He was a free swinger to such an extent that frequently on his follow-through he'd hit himself in the back, and they were afraid that with the constant wear and tear and the bruising into his shoulders that it might create a situation that could possibly lead to cancer. So they created a leather pad, or rather a sponge pad, that they put inside his baseball shirt and sweatshirt so to cushion the blow from his own bat. I've never seen another hitter backlash himself with a bat, but Jim did.
It was the best offensive year of any Oriole ever. I mean, including Frank's Triple Crown, when you think about it. I mean, Jim hit 46, I think it was, home runs, 141 runs batted in, and hit 302. And he didn't lead anything. You know, I mean, that was the year Maris hit 61. Mantle even hit more.
At times, Jim could be his own worst enemy. He'd get so upset over not being able to deliver, let's say, in the clutch and help the ball club. If they lost a game, he'd be in the clubhouse very, very angry, and he'd sit in that stool and just mope about it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. It bothered him. Every time he didn't, I guess Diamond felt he should have gone, you know, 1 for 4 every day, and you know, as a big power hitter, he struck out a lot, and I think maybe that ate at him somewhat. But boy, he was something to handle. He really was.
Among other things, Jim Gentile was a good fielder. He held on to a lot of bum throws. Baseball fans can become insatiable. Once a guy has had a terrific year like that, nothing will do, but he has to have a terrific year all the time. And the following year was a letdown, and so they turned against Gentile, and you could go out there and hear people booing.
Paul Blair was to center field into the outfield what Brooks Robinson was to third base.
I'll never forget Earl Weaver telling Paul Blair one time, he says, "Paul, you're playing too shallow." And Paul Blair played one of the shallowest center fields that I've ever seen. And I remember Paul Blair telling Earl Weaver, says, "Earl, when you see a ball go over my head and it doesn't leave the ballpark and I don't catch it, then you can tell me to back up."
Paul played probably the shortest center field of anybody ever saw, because he could go back so well. I mean, you never saw a ball go over his head because he'd get back there. But he was also cutting off those line drive singles and stuff. And yeah, he was just a great center fielder. You know, Frank always kids now. Of course, it wasn't true. He said anything that went up, he just yelled, "Paul."
Well, Palmer never, when he was pitching, never had a press conference when he didn't mention Paulie's name. "Thanks, Paul," because he could. Jim threw a lot of high fly balls, and more than a few of them were very deep. But Paulie had a way of getting back and catching those things before they did any damage to anybody. He made a great difference, and there just haven't been that many great center fielders in baseball in recent years, particularly.
Paul Blair, one time in spring training, did something for me. I was talking about getting a jump on the ball, and Paul said, well, he said sometimes, he said not all of the time, but sometimes the sound of the bat hitting the ball, you'll have an indication of which way it's going. He took me out in center field one day during batting practice and turned his back to home plate. And he, on 5 or 6 different swings, and would tell me, "I think that's over here, over here." And then I remember one time he said, "Uh-oh," and turned around and the ball was in our general area, maybe not right at us, but it was uncanny to have a fellow do that.
Well, you know, that was my forte. That's what I really thrived on trying to do, is take any kind of ball that was hit to the outfield. I felt I could catch any one of them.
Well, I mean, it just always seemed that in the 9th inning, Eddie Murray always came up. One way or another, it always seemed that it was his time. And he was a great money player. I mean, it always, you know, it's September. It seemed like every year it was, what's wrong with Eddie Murray on May 15th? And then it was Eddie hitting 370 in September.
To me, he was never going to be a 50 home run guy, because Eddie would bear down so much in the big series and the big game and the big at-bat that I don't think he could ever keep that intensity for 162 games. But he was and is the best clutch hitter I've ever seen.
I really would have to say that Frank taught the Orioles how to win. He was a very, very competitive player, but he did it by design. And he also was not afraid to express an opinion, as opposed to Brooks, who was just as great a competitor. But Brooks wasn't the kind of a fellow to go over and say, hey. But Frank would do that.
Frank Robinson was a leader by example and what he could do on the field. The day that they made the trade, by trading, I believe it was Jack Balchin and Simpson, and Milt Pappas for Frank Robinson. It was a multiple player, but Pappas was involved along with another player. Gene Woodling, who was the Orioles' first base coach, said, if we don't win the pennant, and he said it for publication on the record, if we don't win the pennant with Frank Robinson, then all of us should be fired.
Brooks said something like, before Frank Robinson came here, we had a really good ball club, but it took Frank to make us a winner. And in the 6 years that Frank played here, we won 4 pennants, so I think that speaks for itself.
And when I first started covering baseball, Robinson was the leader of the Orioles, and actually it was a game in Fenway Park, but it was still the Orioles. When they were tied in the 10th inning, and in the bottom of the 9th, when the Red Sox had the bases loaded, Frank had cracked a rib, diving against the wall and making a game-saving catch. And in the top of the 10th inning, he beat out a bunt with a runner on third and 2 outs because he couldn't swing the bat and they didn't know it. He just found a way to win.
You missed the cutoff, man. You heard about it from Frank. If you missed a sign, you heard about it from Frank. In later years, he was a fellow that was the judge of the Kangaroo Court. That was one of the great experiences a reporter could have, to be a part of that.
Remember Paul Richards working with a young third baseman who didn't look like he'd ever hit. He'd have him out 4 hours before the game and an hour after the game, ground ball after ground ball, and working on his hitting. Turned out to be one of the greatest players of all time, Brooks Robinson.
Well, I don't think I'll ever see another third baseman play any better. Now, there may be somebody come along and play it as well, but I kind of doubt that, because Brooks was special from the word go, and he was the kind of a man that he never had to think about what to do in any situation, in any game. It was just, he knew. Instantaneously, he knew how to make the right move. The day that Brooks retired, and I was a master of ceremonies at second base, I introduced the player representative, Doug DeCince, and he was to come out and speak on behalf of the ball club for Brooks. And I introduced him, and he got a great big round of applause and came out of the dugout, and on the way he stopped at third base and reached down and pulled the bag up out of the ground and ran out there to second base and handed it to Brooks. Suffice to say, he did not have to make a speech. And I talked to Doug about that later, and he said, Charlie, I don't know. He said, I never thought about it. It was not planned. He said, I started out there, and here's this bag, and I thought, hey, this is Brooksy's place, and I just pulled it out of the ground and gave it to him. That was an afternoon you wouldn't forget either.
I remember that there was an umpire in the American League by the name of Ed Hurley. He was a very hard-bitten kind of an individual. And I said to Hurley early in Brooks's career, what do you think of Brooks Robinson? Well, naturally, all the umpires liked Brooks Robinson because of the way he handled himself. He never argued excessively with them. The worst they could expect from him maybe would be a dirty look, but and that was the extent of Brooks offering a protest, because he's not given to confrontation. That's just not his manner. He has all the graces that you expect of a Southern gentleman, which he certainly exemplifies. But Hurley, on that occasion, I said to him again, what do you think of Brooks Robinson? He said, well, he plays third base like he came down from a higher league.
One guy that I always thought made great plays whenever I was here was Al Bumbry. Whether it was, I remember him twice jumping over the center field fence in one year to beat the Red Sox. A couple of times scoring from first base on seemingly harmless singles. I mean, he was a guy I loved. Belanger was one of my favorite players of all time, and so watching him make the plays, they can talk all they want about Ozzie Smith. Belanger didn't have to dive.
Remember seeing Mark Belanger, probably, in my mind, the best defensive shortstop that I've ever seen. And I've seen some good ones from Roy McMillan through Ozzie Smith, who's brilliant. But just defensively, I don't know if there's ever been a shortstop like Mark Belanger.
Yeah, Jackie Brandt could be called a flake, but he had more natural ability than I think most Oriole players I've seen. He just had fantastic natural ability, but he was unusual. Tiger Stadium one day, we had the tie run at second base, top of the ninth inning. Hank Bauer's managing, and he called for time, and he asked Brandt to come over there because the count was 3 balls and 2 strikes, and he said, "What are you going to look for?" And I'm told, this is, Brandt said, "Fastball." Bauer said, "You got it. Be ready." So Brandt went out there and tightened up the gloves and dug in and stepped in, and the pitcher came out of the set and threw. Strike 3 is called. He never swung the bat. Bauer went crazy. He ripped the hat off. We couldn't wait for for Brandt to get into the dugout, and he says, "What did I tell you?" He said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Didn't I say look for the fastball?" He said, "Yeah, what were you looking for?" He said, "The fastball." He said, "Well, why didn't you swing?" He said, "I was looking inside," and he threw it outside.
Lee McPhail said to him one time, "Jack, I hope you have a nice winter." He said, "Oh, Lee," he said, "don't worry about the winters. I always have a great winter. It's the summers in baseball that give me hell."
Willie Miranda was, one of the things that surprised me most about Miranda was that he never hit any better than he did, because he had really strong, quick hands, and I guess, I don't mean to say he bailed out, but he just never stayed in on the pitch. He was kind of going away from it a lot and was not as effective as I thought he could be. But boy, he could field with anybody, and he could certainly throw with anybody, and he had a pretty good head too, because he wore number 7, and I thought for years that I'd look at the traveling secretary, and we traveled by train in those days, and he always had the compartment number 7, and I thought that was because of his number. Number 7 was in the middle of the car, not over the wheels. That's why he had number 7. Mo Dabrowski came into this ballpark, and about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he went out to the visitors' bullpen, and they had tanks of water. He took the tank off, and he had a black and a goldfish, put it into the water, capped it up again, and then he took all of the chairs and benches out of the visitors' bullpen dugout, carried them way up on the terrace behind the trees out there in center field. So when the visiting bullpen reported, nothing to sit on and fish swimming in their water cooler.
I think John Lowenstein's stretcher caper was probably one of the funniest incidents in the history of the club. He had singled home the tying run, or I guess it was the winning run. What turned out to be the winning run. It wasn't in the 9th inning, so it wasn't sudden death. But in trying to draw a throw from the outfielder toward him rather than to the plate, he ended up getting hit in the back of the head with the neck with a throw, and he went down in a hump, and suddenly everybody was thrilled to death that we just looked like we had just won a ball game. Everybody was quiet, and then they ran the stretcher out and they picked him up gingerly, and everybody stood and gave him a kind of a steady applause and tribute to his hustle. And he gets to the edge of the track and is just about to disappear down the dugout steps, and all of a sudden he sits up and he goes like this and smiles at the fans. And later on he admitted that he had planned it about halfway to the dugout. But I guess that's when he regained consciousness. Who knows?
The fence. Years ago, it wasn't padded. As a matter of fact, in 1954, there wasn't even a fence, just a huge hedge in center field, 450 feet away from home plate. Since those days of the distant shrubbery, the fence has been the stuff of legend. Sweet, heroic home runs that were like ambrosia for the soul, and dramatic catches by gray-clad specters that extinguish the spirit. Using leather and lumber, the forces of darkness and light perform with equal brilliance along the warning track and beyond. On June 10, 1959, the Cleveland Indians' Rocky Colavito performed a seemingly mythical feat by hitting 4 consecutive home runs in one game.
I was struggling. I said, tonight might be the night. I said, I might come out of it tonight. Jerry Walker was the pitcher the first time, and I batted in the first inning, and I walked. And I went out into the field, and the Orioles had a little outfielder by the name of Albie Pearson, and he had a line shot down the right field line. And I came over, and I made kind of a running catch. And as I caught it, I was right on the wall. And as I did that, some fan leaned over and poured a cup of beer right in my face, you know, and I was, of course, livid. And I challenged him for after the game, and, you know, he said, I'll be there, and, you know, I said, you better be. So then I came up the next time up, and Walker was the pitcher again. And I hit a fastball, and I knew that the ball was a home run. And the following time I came up, and Arnold Porter Carrero was relieving. He hit the outside corner with a slider, and I hit it really good. And it went over the 390 marker in left center. So that made it number 2. Now I go out into the field, and this guy, I'm getting kind of an ovation from the right field stands, you know, even though I'm a visiting player. But I had always been treated good in Baltimore. Baltimore was a great place for me. I had some good nights there, and the fans were always excellent. I always enjoyed going there. I came up a third time, a third official time, and Arnie's still the pitcher. And believe it or not, I hit almost the same pitch. Now I have 3. Now I go out there and I'm getting a standing ovation, including this guy that threw the beer, because I kept my eye on him. So I come up the 4th time, and Ernie Johnson, he was their top reliever at the time, the Baltimore top reliever. He had not given up a home run to this point. First pitch Ernie Johnson throws me is up in here. So I just raised my head and it went right under my chin. It was a purpose pitch, you know, he was brushing me back. So the next pitch was about in here, and I just got the bat out in front. I probably hit that one. I got out in front real good. I probably hit that as hard, or it's probably the hardest of the 4. You would think I was a hometown player. That's the kind of ovation. I mean, standing ovation from the stands also. And when I ran out to my position, again, it was such a heartwarming thing. And I don't know, I don't know if that endeared me to the Baltimore fans or what, but I always was treated very well there.
My memories of Mantle in this ballpark, before they had a fence out in center field, had a hedge, and if it got in there, it was a ground rule double. The Orioles had a very, very gifted center fielder by the name of Chuck Deering. He could go get it with anybody. Mantle hit a ball that looked like it had to go maybe into the hedge, if not over it. And Chuck Deering flew through the air and caught the ball. Mantle was around about shortstop at the time. And he kind of kicked the dirt a little bit and came in, and the visitors' dugout was then on the third base side, and they had a drinking fountain held up by a pipe, maybe an inch wide or something like that, in the middle of the dugout. And he went into that dugout and twisted and tore the drinking fountain right out of the wall. Jack Dunn, who knew Mickey Mantle very well, sent him a bill for it.
Well, Cal Ripken hit a deep fly ball to left center. It looked like it had a chance to be a home run. Would it clear the wall or not? And then Brad Kamensk, big center fielder, very agile, a lot of speed, made probably the most spectacular play that wasn't in the history of the stadium, maybe of any stadium. He literally, on the dead run, climbed to the top of the fence, defying gravity, caught the ball backhanded, and then left the ballpark. Disappeared, vaulted right over the top, and left our side. Turned out when he hit the other side, the ball had dropped from his glove, and it was ruled a home run for Cal.
But Frank's home run was just astonishing. I saw it, but I really couldn't convince myself that didn't that bounce out? That was my first thought, and then the more I thought about it, I thought, no, that's gone.
I don't have a collection of baseball souvenirs, but if I could pick out one from all across the years at Memorial Stadium, the one baseball I would prize most highly would be that Frank Robinson home run.
When we first came here, there was a tradition in Baltimore that when an opposing pitcher was lifted and headed to the bench or the dugout or wherever, that the fans would stand up and wave their handkerchiefs and give him a taste of the Baltimore farewell. And I sort of liked it. It wasn't the most sanitary thing in the world, but it was colorful and it was characteristic of Baltimore. And I was sad when they discontinued that custom.
One of the things I remember about 1983, coming here from Boston, I've been with the Red Sox, and of course in Boston the fans always tell you about how long-suffering they are.
You know, the Sox have not won a World Series since 1918. They've been breaking my heart ever since I was a youngster. And now the Orioles in 1982, the previous year, had lost the last game of the season after a stirring comeback. But they didn't win. Now in Boston, it struck me that all winter long the people would be ruining the fact that Palmer, that bum, you know, couldn't win the big ball game and so on and so forth. But when I got here, it was just the opposite. The fans reacted as though the Orioles had won everything the year before. The day before opening day, we'd come in from spring training, had a workout here at the stadium, and then went down in buses to the Inner Harbor, where they had 50,000 people.
Well, I was always doing something kind of goofy, you know, to keep them involved. And I know in games that I didn't even play in, at times I'd be sitting in the dugout watching the game. If we were down 2 or 3 runs or something like that, I could communicate with any section in this ballpark by waving a towel, and they would start getting rowdy and loud and everything. And when all the fans got behind us, we were unbeatable.
Memorial Stadium, there's always an electricity. It's a loud ballpark. I don't know if that's the acoustics or just the manner of the fans or a combination, probably a combination. But they come here and they make noise. One thing I'll never forget was 1988. The ball club had lost 21 consecutive games. It was the worst beginning to a season by far in the entire 100-plus year history of baseball. Had never happened. It probably never will happen again. And the Orioles won a ball game and promptly lost the next 2 before they came home. So they came home a Monday night with Texas, which was not a big draw. The record was 1-23, and 50,000 people were here at the ballpark. And the first batter of the game for Texas, you know, took a strike or whatever, and the crowd went, "Wah!" You know, and then ultimately he popped out, and I'm doing the broadcast, it's the most exciting broadcast I ever worked at, and he pops it up, "Wah!" You know, and Cal's under it, and he makes the catch, "Wah!" You know, and it was like the World Series had started.
I remember Wild Bill up in you know, section up there leading the stadium. I remember the 1979, I really remember the fans and how they really became one with the team.
I've been sat behind that home plate and listened to the deafening roar of this crowd so many times that my hearing has gone bad. And any time I need a reminder of what it sounded like, I remember it through my deafness, because it used to hurt my ears. They'd get so loud in this stadium, and that's, you know, that's a nice bad thing to happen to you.
One of my favorite stories about this ballpark had happened one evening kind of early. A gentleman who came in among the early arrivals at the ballpark had a heart attack and was down behind the Oriole dugout. Texas Rangers were in town, and pitchers were out there doing their running. And among those pitchers was a guy named Doc Medich, who was also a doctor. Well, Rex Barney and I were up in the press box watching this, and there was a Baltimore City policeman with this gentleman doing the best he could to help him. And Barney thought maybe, I don't know how the doctor will feel about this, but he just said if there's a doctor in the house, would he report behind the Oriole dugout? Medich, running out there, broke off immediately, and at the dead run came back here. And he and this Baltimore police sergeant finally stabilized the man and got him out of the ballpark. And it was kind of a moving episode to see. And the next time the Texas Rangers came to town, this is a beautiful part of the story, that gentleman who had the heart attack threw out the first pitch to Doc Medich.
I can't tell you, my partner on ESPN Sunday Night Baseball, Joe Morgan, great player, Hall of Famer, he and I were talking about Fenway Park, Wrigley Field, the old ballparks in which he played, like Crosley Field, Forbes Field. And he said that for him, when he came to the American League, and even before that, in the '83 World Series, when he was with Philadelphia and they played the Orioles, he said Memorial Stadium was the one American League ballpark that he really wanted to play in, more than Fenway, because he said, hey, Fenway's got the history and they had some great players, but Memorial Stadium is the place where great things happened.
I think in the case of Memorial Stadium and the Baltimore Orioles, I think Baltimore Orioles made Memorial Stadium. Like some stadiums make a team, you know, the Orioles made Memorial Stadium.
here at Memorial Stadium, you know, different days the ball carried better. You had grass, you had rain, you had wet, you had snow at times. So, you know, it was a little less, you couldn't really count on what kind of baseball game you were going to have here. But one thing we always knew is that we were going to end up winning.